The ER doors slid open, and she stumbled in alone, a crimson stain spreading across her white coat. Before she collapsed, the nurse grabbed her phone. The emergency contact didn't say, "Husband." It said, "Dante." Within 10 minutes, the city's most feared syndicate boss tore through the hospital doors. The storm over Chicago that night was unforgiving, sheets of rain hammering against the reinforced glass of St. Jude's Medical Center. Inside the emergency department, it was a quiet Tuesday until 11:42 p.m. The automatic sliding doors stuttered open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and a woman who looked like she was already half ghost. Nora Sullivan was barefoot, her designer trench coat soaked through, but the rain wasn't what had turned the fabric dark. It was blood. She had one arm wrapped protectively around her swollen pregnant belly, and the other blindly reaching out for the triage desk. "Help," she whispered. The word barely had enough breath behind it to carry, but the raw desperation in her voice stopped triage nurse Sarah Jenkins dead in her tracks. Sarah bolted from around the desk, just as Nora's knees gave out. "I need a gurney. Trauma 1 now," Sarah screamed, catching the woman's shoulders before her head could strike the linoleum. The ER erupted into organized chaos. Dr. Harrison Boyd, the attending trauma surgeon, rushed out of curtain 3. They heaved Nora onto the gurney, the wheels squeaking violently against the wet floor. Her skin was the color of ash, her lips tinged blue. "Pulses thready, heart rate 140, Sarah rattled off, strapping a blood pressure cuff to Nora's limp arm. "BP is 80/50 and dropping. She's hemorrhaging. Let's get 2 large-bore IVs in her. Push fluids and call the blood bank for O negative," Dr. Boyd commanded, snapping on his gloves. As they wheeled her under the harsh surgical lights of Trauma 1, the true extent of the damage became visible. This wasn't a car accident. The bruising on her face, a swollen jaw, a laceration above her brow, was the distinct, brutal artwork of closed fists. While the medical team fought to stabilize Nora and monitor the fetal heartbeat, an administrative nurse named Brenda stood by the discarded trench coat, rifling through the blood-stained leather handbag to find an ID and an emergency contact. Brenda pulled out a pristine Illinois driver's license. Nora Beatrice Sullivan. The name rang a bell, a loud one. She was the wife of Arthur Sullivan, the city's high-profile district attorney. "Oh, God," Brenda muttered. She immediately reached for Nora's phone to call the DA, but the screen was shattered, dead from water damage. Digging deeper into a hidden zipper pocket of the purse, Brenda's fingers brushed against heavy, expensive cardstock. She pulled out a matte black business card. It had no company logo, no title, just a single first name embossed in silver foil and a private cell phone number beneath it. Dunch. Flipping the card over, Brenda saw a handwritten note in sharp, masculine scrawl. "If you ever need me, no matter what." Assuming it was a private security contractor, or perhaps a brother, Brenda hurried to the front desk and dialed the number. It rang only once. "Speak," a voice answered. The single word was terrifyingly quiet, laced with an authority that made the hair on the back of Brenda's neck stand up. "Hello, is this Dante?" Brenda stammered, intimidated by the sheer gravity of the voice. "I'm calling from St. Jude's Medical Center. We have a Nora Sullivan here. She was just brought into the trauma bay. She's in critical condition, and your card was, 'I will be there in 8 minutes.' Sir, wait, you should know her husband." The line went dead. 9 minutes later, the atmosphere in St. Jude's shifted entirely. The wail of ambulance sirens outside was drowned out by the screeching tires of 3 black Cadillac Escalades, jumping the curb and parking directly in the ambulance bay. Richard Blaine, the night shift hospital administrator, had just come down to handle the PR nightmare of the DA's wife being assaulted. But when the ER doors blew open, Richard physically took a step back. 6 men, in tailored dark suits, entered first, fanning out with military precision. They didn't draw weapons, but the heavy bulges under their jackets made it clear they didn't need to. They effectively locked down the lobby, turning away incoming walk-ins and blocking the exits. Then, Dante Corvino walked in. He was the head of the Corvino Syndicate, a man who controlled the city's ports its underground casinos, and half its politicians. He was a phantom to the press, but a very real, very lethal reality to the Chicago underworld. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as black and cold as obsidian, Dante didn't look like a man who had rushed. He looked like a man who was about to burn the building to its foundations. "Where is she?" Dante's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that commanded immediate obedience. Richard Blaine scrambled forward, his clipboard shaking. "Mr. Corvino." "Sir, we weren't expecting you. You aren't family." Dante closed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbing Richard by the lapels of his coat and lifting him an inch off the ground. The Mafia boss's composure was perfectly intact, but his eyes betrayed a terrifying, violent panic. "I am the only family she has tonight," Dante said softly. "Now, take me to her, or I'll have my men dismantle this hospital brick by brick to find her myself." The waiting room of the surgical wing was completely isolated. Dante's right-hand man, Leo Costello, had politely but firmly cleared the floor of all other civilians. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the expensive dark cedar cologne of the syndicate men standing guard at every corridor. Dante sat rigidly on a plastic waiting room chair. His hands clasped so tightly together, his knuckles were bone white. There was a smear of Nora's blood on his left cuff transferred when a nurse had brushed past him carrying her clothes in an evidence bag. He stared at the crimson stain, the beast inside him rattling against its cage. How had it come to this? The city thought Nora Sullivan lived a charmed life. Married to Arthur Sullivan, the Golden Boy district attorney, she was the picture of philanthropic grace. But Dante knew the truth. He had known since the night 6 months ago, when he found her shivering in an alleyway behind a charity gala. Arthur had left her there after backhanding her across the face for embarrassing him in front of the mayor. Dante, whose syndicate was actively being targeted by Arthur's task force, had stepped out of the shadows and offered her his handkerchief. He should have used her as leverage. He should have taken photos to destroy the DA's pristine reputation. Instead, he had looked into her tear-filled, defiant green eyes and felt something inside his chest lock into place. A fierce, predatory protectiveness. Over the next few months, their paths crossed in secret. Whispered conversations in library alcoves, burner phones. She became his quiet sanctuary. He became her only shield against her husband's escalating, alcohol-fueled rages. Dante had begged her to let him kill Arthur. He could make the DA disappear without a trace. But Nora, terrified of the political fallout and the danger it would put Dante in, refused. Then she got pregnant. Dante closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard it ached. He remembered the day she told him. Arthur had been infertile for years, a closely guarded secret. The baby wasn't the district attorney's. It was the Mafia boss's. "Boss," Leo said quietly, breaking Dante from his dark reverie. Leo approached, a sleek tablet in his hand. "I pulled the street cameras near the DA's townhouse. It wasn't a random mugging." Dante stood up slowly. "Show me." Leo played the footage. It was grainy, shot through the rain, but clear enough. An unmarked van pulled up to the back gate of the Sullivan estate. 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing masks. They were known enforcers for the Irish mob, the O'Connors, Dante's bitterest rivals. But what made Dante's blood run ice cold was what happened next. The back door of the townhouse opened. Arthur Sullivan stood there, wearing a silk robe. He spoke to the enforcers, stepped aside, and let them into his home. 5 minutes later, the enforcers dragged a struggling, bleeding Nora out the back door. She fought like a wildcat, breaking free and running into the dark, rainy streets while the men, perhaps spooked by an approaching siren, retreated to their van. "Arthur has been burying gambling debts," Leo explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Millions of dollars owed to the O'Connors. The DA's office was about to seize the O'Connors' shipping containers. Arthur made a trade. He gave them Nora in exchange for wiping his debt and saving his own life. A suffocating silence descended on the waiting room. Dante didn't shout. He didn't break anything. The reaction was far worse. The humanity completely drained from his face. leaving behind the cold, calculating apex predator that ruled the city's underworld. Leo. Dante's voice was a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. Yes, boss. Find Arthur Sullivan. Do not kill him. Bring him to the meatpacking facility on the south side. I want him breathing when I get there. And the O'Connors? Tonight, we wipe them from the map. Every lieutenant, every capo, every soldier. I want the streets running red by dawn. Before Leo could nod, the heavy double doors of the surgical wing swung open. Dr. Boyd walked out, his scrubs stained, his surgical mask pulled down to his chin. He looked exhausted. Dante was in front of him before the doctor could take a full breath. Is she alive? Dante demanded. Dr. Boyd swallowed hard, intimidated by the sheer, imposing force of the man. She's alive. We managed to stabilize the internal bleeding. She suffered severe blunt force trauma, leading to a partial placental abruption. It was incredibly close. If she had arrived 5 minutes later, she would have bled to death. Dante felt the floor tilt beneath him, the relief hitting him harder than a physical blow. The baby? The fetal heartbeat dropped, but it has stabilized, Dr. Boyd said gently. She is a fighter, Mr. Corvino, but she's heavily sedated. She won't wake for a few hours. I want her moved to a private floor. Now. No nurses or doctors enter that room without my men vetting them first, and her name is wiped from the hospital registry. As far as the world is concerned, Nora Sullivan did not come here tonight. Dr. Boyd nodded quickly. Of course, I'll make the arrangements. As the doctor scurried away, Dante turned to the hallway window, looking out at the sprawling, rain-soaked skyline of the city. He had spent his life building an empire of shadows, believing he was incapable of bringing anything but destruction into the world. But Nora had changed the rules. She was carrying his light, his legacy, and she had nearly paid for it with her life, because of a coward's debt. Arthur Sullivan thought he could trade his wife to save his own skin. The O'Connors thought they could lay hands on what belonged to Dante Corvino and live to see tomorrow. They were both about to learn that there are fates far worse than death. The Mafia Boss adjusted his cuffs, the dried blood on the fabric a stark reminder of the promise he had made her. If you ever need me, no matter what. Dante turned his back to the window, his eyes flat and dead. Leo, he commanded into the silence of the hospital corridor, let's go to work. The Southside meatpacking facility was a cavernous tomb of stainless steel and frost. The air inside the main processing floor was kept at a biting 36 degrees, smelling faintly of bleach, old copper, and the undeniable chill of the grave. Arthur Sullivan, the Golden Boy District Attorney of Chicago, was shivering violently. He was strapped to a heavy steel chair, bolted to the concrete floor, still wearing his monogrammed silk robe, though it was now soaked with freezing water. His pristine image, the impeccably groomed hair, the confident political sneer had completely dissolved. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the dim, cavernous room, trying to make out the shapes of the men standing in the shadows. He had expected the Irish. He had expected Declan O'Connor's thugs to come back for him, demanding more money, or complaining that the job went south. But when the heavy metal doors ground open, the man who stepped into the dim overhead light was not Declan O'Connor. It was Dante Corvino. Arthur's breath hitched in his throat. His political career had been built on promising to dismantle the Corvino Syndicate. He knew the face of the man standing before him, but seeing him in the flesh radiating a lethal, suffocating calm was entirely different from staring at a mugshot on a task force bulletin board. Dante walked slowly, his heavy Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete. He stopped 5 feet from Arthur. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need to. The sheer gravity of his presence made the freezing room feel impossibly small. Corvino, Arthur gasped, trying to summon a shred of his courtroom bravado. What is the meaning of this? You're kidnapping a sitting district attorney. The FBI will tear this city apart looking for me. Whatever the O'Connors promised you, I can double it. I have immunity deals. I can. Quiet, Dante said. It wasn't a shout, it was a murmur. but it hit Arthur like a physical blow. The DA snapped his mouth shut. Leo Costello stepped out of the shadows, holding a sleek black briefcase. He set it on a stainless steel table and clicked the latches open. "I don't care about your deals, Arthur," Dante spoke, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "And I don't care about the O'Connors. In fact, by the time the sun rises, the O'Connor syndicate will be nothing but a memory. My men are currently paying visits to Declan's shipping yards, his nightclubs, and his suburban estate. There will be no Irish mob left to collect your gambling debts." Arthur's eyes widened in terror. Then, "Why am I here? If you're wiping them out, you should be thanking me. I gave them a distraction tonight." Dante's jaw tightened. The faint flicker of a monstrous rage danced in his obsidian eyes. He leaned down, placing both hands on the armrests of Arthur's chair, bringing his face inches from the district attorney's. "The distraction," Dante whispered, the ice in his voice cracking to reveal the inferno beneath, "was Nora." Arthur froze. For a second, his politically trained mind couldn't connect the dots. The untouchable mafia boss and his quiet, battered wife. Then, the realization crashed over him, draining the remaining color from his face. "You," Arthur stammered, staring at Dante. Suddenly, a twisted, desperate laugh bubbled up from Arthur's chest. "Oh God, it's you, the rumor, the late nights. You're the one. I knew the baby wasn't mine. I've been sterile for 5 years. I thought she was sleeping with some pathetic junior partner at the firm. I wasn't going to let her parade a bastard child around while I ran for the Senate. It would have ruined my campaign." Dante's hand shot out. His fingers wrapped around Arthur's throat, squeezing with calculated, agonizing pressure. Arthur gagged, his hands clawing uselessly at the zip ties binding his wrists. "You traded her life," Dante stated, watching the oxygen leave Arthur's face. "You handed a pregnant woman over to butchers to clear your ledger and save your political aspirations." Dante released him abruptly. Arthur slumped forward, coughing and gasping for the freezing air. "I could kill you right now," Dante continued smoothly, stepping back and pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his hands. "It would take less than a minute. We have incinerators in the back that burn at 2,000 degrees. You would simply cease to exist. But death is a release, Arthur, and I do not intend to release you." Dante nodded to Leo. Leo stepped forward and pulled a stack of documents from the briefcase. He placed them on a clipboard and shoved them under Arthur's nose. What is this?" Arthur wheezed. "These are the wire transfers from your secret Cayman accounts, moving millions of dollars of embezzled campaign funds directly to the O'Connor syndicate," Leo explained flatly. "And a drafted confession, detailing how you, District Attorney Arthur Sullivan, have been secretly orchestrating the Irish mob's narcotics trade, using your office to bury their rivals." "I'm not signing that," Arthur spat, defiance momentarily overriding his fear. "It's a lie. The feds will know it's a forgery." "It won't be a forgery," Dante said, gesturing to the shadows. 2 enforcers stepped forward. One grabbed Arthur's right hand, forcibly uncurling his fingers, while the other held a heavy, suppressed, tactical pistol. "We don't need your signature, Arthur. We just need your fingerprints," Dante explained coldly. "Your prints are going on these documents. Your prints are going on the weapon that killed Declan O'Connor 30 minutes ago. Your encrypted phone, which we took from your townhouse, has been pinging off cell towers at every location where an O'Connor lieutenant was murdered tonight." Arthur shook his head wildly, the true horror of his situation finally taking root. No, you can't do this. I'm the DA. I'm the victim here. They broke into my house." "By tomorrow morning," Dante continued, his voice echoing like a judge delivering a final verdict, "the FBI will find these documents in a safety deposit box registered in your name. They will find the murder weapons in the trunk of your car. You won't be remembered as a victim, Arthur. You will be remembered as the most corrupt, violent politician in Chicago history. A man who tried to take over a cartel and had his own wife attacked to cover his tracks." The enforcers pressed Arthur's thumb heavily onto the ink pad, then onto the confession papers. They grabbed the pistol, wrapping his trembling fingers around the grip, ensuring his prints were perfectly transferred to the metal. "You're going to federal prison, Arthur." Dante leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Not a white-collar resort, a maximum security facility. And who do you think runs the cell blocks in those prisons?" Arthur began to weep, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed off the frozen steel walls. He realized, with crushing certainty, that Dante Corvino had just rewritten reality. "My men will be waiting for you," Dante said, turning his back on the ruined politician. "They will ensure you live a very, very long time. And every single day, you will remember the night you tried to throw my family to the wolves." "Let's go, Leo," Dante commanded, walking toward the exit. "I need to get back to the hospital." The morning sun over Chicago broke through the heavy, gray storm clouds, casting a warm, golden hue across the private VIP recovery wing of St. Jude's Medical Center. The entire floor was dead silent, save for the rhythmic, reassuring beep of the heart monitor in room 412. Nora Sullivan drifted up from the heavy depths of anesthesia. Her body felt entirely foreign to her, a landscape of aching bruises, heavy limbs, and a dull, throbbing pain in her abdomen. Panic, sharp and immediate, pierced through her drug-addled brain. She gasped, her eyes snapping open as her hands flew frantically to her stomach. "He's safe." The voice was a low, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. Nora turned her head, wincing as the bruised muscles in her neck protested. Dante was sitting in a high-backed leather chair beside her bed. He looked immaculate. Gone was the blood-stained suit from the night before. He wore a crisp charcoal jacket and a white shirt. There was not a single speck of dirt or violence on him. But Nora knew him too well. She could see the faint shadows of exhaustion beneath his dark eyes, and the rigid, coiled tension in his broad shoulders that only appeared when he had just returned from a war. He leaned forward, gently taking her trembling hand in his. His touch was incredibly warm, entirely contrary to the cold brutality he showed the rest of the world. "The baby is safe, Nora," Dante repeated softly, his thumb tracing the back of her knuckles. "Dr. Boyd assured me the placental tear was minor. You're both going to be perfectly fine." Tears spilled over Nora's eyelashes, tracking down her pale, bruised cheeks. The memory of the rain, the rough hands of the Irish enforcers, and the terrifying realization of Arthur's betrayal flooded back. "Arthur," she choked out, her voice raspy. "He let them in, Dante. He stood there and watched them take me." "I know," Dante said. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling finality. "Arthur is no longer a concern." Nora's breath hitched. "Did you? Dante, if you killed a district attorney, the federal government will never stop hunting you. You can't go to war with the FBI." Dante offered a faint, reassuring smile. He reached for the remote on the bedside table and clicked on the wall-mounted television, keeping the volume low. The local news channel was broadcasting live from the steps of the federal courthouse. The banner at the bottom of the screen read in bold red letters, "Massacre in the Underworld. Day Arthur Sullivan arrested." Nora stared at the screen in disbelief. The news anchor's voice was breathless with excitement. "Authorities are calling it the bloodiest night in Chicago's history. The O'Connor crime syndicate has been effectively dismantled in a series of coordinated citywide attacks. But the true shock came at dawn, when FBI agents arrested District Attorney Arthur Sullivan. Sources confirmed that weapons tied directly to the murders of the O'Connor leadership were found in Sullivan's possession, along with a massive cache of offshore financial documents, proving the DA was not only laundering money for the mob, but actively orchestrating a violent takeover. The broadcast showed footage of Arthur, still wearing his wet, ruined silk robe, being shoved into the back of an armored FBI vehicle. He looked hollowed out, screaming wildly at the cameras about Dante Corvino, though the reporters dismissed it as the frantic ramblings of a cornered, corrupt politician. Dante muted the television. Nora looked away from the screen, her green eyes locking onto Dante's. She understood immediately. The sheer scale, the meticulous planning, the absolute destruction of Arthur's life, without a single drop of blood leading back to the Corvino family. It was terrifying. It was brilliant. And he had done it all for her. "He's going away for the rest of his life," Dante said quietly, his dark eyes searching her face, watching for any sign of fear or rejection. He had just showed her exactly what kind of monster he was capable of being. "He will die in a federal prison, completely disgraced. He will never come near you, or our child, ever again." Nora didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, lacing her fingers tightly through his. She had spent years trying to play the perfect political wife, shrinking herself to fit into Arthur's respectable, abusive world. She had believed that the light was safe and the shadows were dangerous. But the light had almost killed her. The shadow had saved her. "You started a war for me," Nora whispered, the reality of the night settling over her. "I ended a war for you," Dante corrected gently. He stood up, leaning over the hospital bed to press a soft, reverent kiss to her unbruised forehead. "There is no more hiding, Nora. There are no more burner phones or stolen minutes in alleyways. The O'Connors are gone. Arthur is buried. From this moment on, you are a ghost to your old life." Nora closed her eyes, feeling a profound, exhausted peace wash over her for the first time in her adult life. "What happens now?" "Now, you heal," Dante said, his voice a fierce, protective vow. "And when you are ready to leave this room, you will not walk out as the victim of a broken politician. You will walk out as Nora Corvino, and this city will belong to you." She looked at the man who ruled the Chicago underworld, a man who commanded killers and manipulated empires, and saw only the father of her child, the man who had answered the phone when she had nothing left. "Okay," she whispered, a fierce new strength sparking in her chest. "Take me home, Dante." The sprawling Corvino estate in Lake Forest stood as a modern fortress of limestone and black iron, shielded from the prying eyes of the world by acres of ancient oaks. It had been exactly 14 months since the night Nora Sullivan was wheeled into St. Jude's Medical Center. In the eyes of the Chicago elite, the DA's wife had quietly filed for divorce amidst the catastrophic scandal that sent Arthur Sullivan to a maximum security federal penitentiary. She had retreated into private life, entirely disappearing from the society pages. But within the hidden, heavily guarded walls of the underworld, Nora had not disappeared. She had ascended. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate's west wing, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Nora sat behind a massive mahogany desk in her private study. She wore a tailored emerald green silk blouse, her posture immaculate, a stark contrast to the broken woman who had once shivered in the rain. In the adjoining nursery, the faint, joyful babble of 10-month-old Matteo Corvino echoed through the open doorway. Nora wasn't just Dante's wife. She had become the architect of the syndicate's legitimate future. Dante controlled the streets, the docks, and the shadows. But Nora controlled the light. Using the meticulous attention to detail she had honed during her years navigating the treacherous waters of high society politics, she had taken over the Corvino family's laundering operations, real estate acquisitions, and charitable fronts. She tapped silver pen against a thick leather ledger, her green eyes narrowed. The numbers on the page in front of her were perfectly balanced, too perfectly. The heavy oak doors of the study opened, and Leo Costello stepped inside, respectfully averting his gaze until Nora acknowledged him. "You asked to see me, Mrs. Corvino." "Yes, Leo." "Close the door," Nora said, her voice smooth, but laced with a commanding edge that she had entirely absorbed from her husband. "I've been reviewing the quarterly reports from the South Side construction developments, specifically the municipal contracts overseen by Victor Rossi." Leo's expression tightened imperceptibly. Victor was a high-ranking capo, a relic of the old regime who had served under Dante's father. He was notoriously brutal and openly disdainful of the fact that the boss had given his new wife the keys to the family's financial kingdom. "Is there an issue with the ledgers?" Leo asked cautiously. "On the surface, no. Victor's accountant is exceptionally talented," Nora replied, turning the ledger around and pointing a manicured finger at a specific column of expenses. "But I spent 5 years running Arthur's campaign finances. I know what a shell corporation looks like when it's bleeding out. Victor is over-reporting the cost of raw steel and funneling the excess margin into a private holding company in Delaware. Leo stepped forward, his eyes scanning the numbers. How much? $3 million over the last 2 quarters, Nora stated flatly. But the theft isn't what concerns me. It's what he's doing with the capital. She pulled a secondary folder from her drawer and tossed it onto the desk. I had our private investigators track the Delaware holding company. It's leasing warehouse space on the East Coast, space currently occupied by remnants of the Greek syndicate. Victor isn't just stealing, Leo. He's funding a rival faction to challenge Dante's monopoly on the shipping lanes. Silence hung heavy in the opulent study. Treason within the family was a death sentence. I will inform the boss immediately, Leo said, his hand instinctively dropping toward the concealed weapon at his waist. Victor won't see tomorrow. No, Nora commanded, stopping Leo in his tracks. Dante is in negotiations with the unions downtown. I will not have him distracted by a rat in his own house. Bring Victor here. To my office. In 1 hour. Leo hesitated, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his stoic face. With respect, Mrs. Corvino, Victor is a dangerous man. When he realizes he's been caught, he will not react reasonably. The boss would want to handle this. Nora stood up. She walked around the desk, projecting an aura of absolute, unyielding calm. The men in this family need to understand that Dante and I are not separate entities, Leo. If they test me, they are testing him. And if I constantly hide behind my husband, they will always view me as a vulnerability. She met Leo's gaze squarely. Bring him to me. Understood, Leo nodded, leaving the room. An hour later, Victor Rossi swaggered into the study. He was a barrel-chested man with a thick neck and cold, arrogant eyes. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit. He immediately dropped his heavy frame into the leather chair opposite the desk, crossing his arms. You wanted to see me, Nora? Victor asked, intentionally omitting her title. Make it quick. The legitimate side of the business might be 9 to 5, but the real world doesn't stop. Nora didn't flinch at the disrespect. She simply slid the folder across the mahogany surface. I wanted to discuss your retirement, Victor, Nora said casually, leaning back in her chair. Victor frowned, picking up the folder. As he flipped through the pages, the bank statements, the surveillance photos of his Delaware warehouses, the shipping manifests, the arrogant sneer melted off his face, replaced by a dark, violent flush of panic. Where did you get this? Victor demanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. You've been spying on a capo? You stupid little girl. You don't understand how this family works. Dante relies on me to keep the streets in line. Dante relies on loyalty, Nora corrected softly. You have been bleeding his legitimate operations to fund a war against him. You thought because I wear silk and rock a baby to sleep that I wouldn't notice $3 million missing from the concrete orders. Victor slammed his hands on the desk, surging to his feet. The sheer size of the man was terrifying, a shadow of the violence Nora had suffered a year ago. But this time, her heart rate didn't even spike. She didn't cower. I bleed for this syndicate, Victor roared, leaning over the desk. I'm not going to be lectured by a politician's leftovers. I'll tell Dante these ledgers are forged. He'll believe his capo over a woman who barely knows the rules of the street. You won't tell Dante anything, a voice rumbled from the shadows of the doorway. Victor froze, the color draining entirely from his face. Dante stepped into the room. He had returned early. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely hollowed out of mercy. He walked over to Nora's side of the desk, his presence an impenetrable wall of lethal authority. He placed a hand gently on Nora's shoulder, a silent testament to their unbreakable front. My wife found the rot in our foundation, Victor, Dante spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. She tracked your betrayal, she gathered the evidence, and she summoned you. The only thing she left for me to do is take out the trash. Victor backed away, his hands raised in a desperate, trembling plea. Boss, please. It's a misunderstanding. The Greeks approached me. I was just playing along to see what they wanted. Dante didn't even look at him. He looked down at Nora, an unspoken question in his dark eyes. He was offering her the final word. Nora looked at the man who had thought she was weak, who had thought he could fracture the empire she and Dante were building for their son. Strip him of his assets, empty his accounts into the family trust, and ensure he never sets foot in Chicago again, Nora stated, her voice as cold as iron. She looked up at Dante. Handle him. Dante smiled a dark, terrifying expression that promised absolute ruin. He nodded to the doorway, where Leo Costello and 2 enforcers had silently appeared. You heard the matriarch, Dante commanded. Take him downstairs. As Victor was dragged from the room, kicking and pleading into the echo of the grand hallway, Dante turned his full attention to his wife. He reached down, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his thumb tracing the flawless line of her jaw. You handled that brilliantly, Dante murmured, his eyes blazing with a mixture of profound pride and dark adoration. I learned from the best, Nora replied, resting her hand over his. From the nursery next door, little Matteo let out a happy squeal. Dante and Nora turned toward the sound, the heavy darkness of their world entirely eclipsed by the light they had built within it. They were no longer just a mafia boss and a runaway wife. They were an empire, and God help anyone who tried to tear it down. Nora's journey from a bleeding, betrayed victim to the undisputed matriarch of a criminal empire is a testament to the transformative power of survival. By embracing the darkness that saved her, she dismantled the corruption of her past and secured her family's future. Ultimately, true power isn't found in living a pristine life. It is forged by ruling the shadows without fear.